Yeah, hello everybody. Yeah, unfortunately we are a little bit late due to technical problems. Again, yeah, back to your term paper. What we have talked about was to describe in the first step the main macroeconomic indicators. So, of course, economic growth via, what's this? No, hopefully my pen is working. Yeah, it's still working. Via real GDP. Maybe you can look at yearly data, or if you find it also quarterly data, but then you have to keep in mind that we have a year under yearly time pattern because of the seasonality, that then you need to have seasonally adjusted data, and especially, but this is maybe a special case for Germany, is the so-called calendar adjustment. This means that we have free time during the year because of Christmas, because of Easter, because of New Year, and some free days in every country. And especially in Germany, these days are always rotating. So sometimes they are on weekend, and sometimes these free days are not on weekends. And if you just keep in mind, let's take Easter and Christmas, both. No, not Easter is always on Mondays, but let's say some days like the 1st of May or the 3rd of October, Christmas, New Year, and you sum this up, then this could be 3, 4, or 5 days more than in another year, if these days are on a weekend or not. Well, and if you just calculate roughly 300 days, or we are working, or 250 per year, and then there's a difference between days of working of 2, 3, or 4 days, then this is a change in working time of about 1% or more. And this has, of course, an economic impact. And this is meant then by calendar adjustment, that you calculate all the data on the same time horizon. Okay, this I forgot last time. Then, of course, inflation. We can look at unemployment, export, imports. Keep in mind these magic square exchange rate we have here, and then I also showed you interest rates. If we talk about the general interest rate in some country, then in general we mean the interest rates of 10-year government bond as a benchmark, and of course also the key interest rates of the central banks in a country are interesting. And this was interest rates. We can skip this. We had this already. And the last one. Then we also can have a look at the government debt situation. Let's download this too. So, is it working? Yep. So if you have a country in Europe, then you know that we have the so-called Maastricht Treaty. And so we want to measure government debt in every country in the same way. Well, if you have a country which is not situated in Europe, then there is somehow another definition of government debt, but just then rely on the data of the National Statistics Office or take some international institution for government debt like the World Bank, um, International Monetary Fund or something. So you can then decide what is reliable data for this. So then let's download this, hopefully. Global Economics, lecture data, and let's have a look now at government debt. And this is in million euros. And do we find this also? This one. And what is also interesting, not only the absolute value, but also with relative to GDP. So I download this too. Take this one here. Absolute and relative to GDP. Well, if you don't find directly the relative number, then I think you will find nominal GDP values, and then you can calculate the relative number via the absolute debt divided by the nominal value of GDP. So this is then the debt ratio. And here then also always keep in mind, if this is a debt ratio and you have here absolute numbers of 65 or something like this, then on the vertical axis you need to write percent, or you divide these numbers by 100. Okay. Relative to GDP. Well, and then you see more or less here for Germany, if we take the longer time horizon, well, you should, I think, for your term paper, I thought that you should start around here, the financial crisis. But let's take here the longer look. Then you see more or less here the rise in government debt more or less continually until the financial crisis in 2008. Then you have this huge step. This were all our special programs within the financial crisis. This was about 150 billion euros within 2 years we spent there. And then we have here, so here rise in government debt, no matter what the economic situation was. And if you remember my macro course, there I called this the problem of asymmetric debt policy. So that until the financial crisis in more or less every industrial country, we always said, well, we can just raise government debt no matter what happens. And problem of asymmetric debt policy. And well, then we had the shock here in the financial crisis. And after that, we introduced in Germany the so-called debt brake. So that is more or less forbidden to make the new debt. Well, we are allowed to rise the debt by 0.35% relative to the nominal GDP. This is roughly about 10 or 20 billion euros. But what we then see after the financial crisis, this was a period of economic prosperity in Germany, especially with zero or negative interest rates. And for this, we more or less had to pay nothing or we got money by rising our debt. And if we step back here, then you see this is just this period here where even the 10-year government bond had an interest rate below zero, not very long, but below zero. And the average time of government bonds in Germany are roughly 7 years. So of course we still had older bonds with 2, 3, 4% interest rates. But since this period lasts roughly about 10 years, then during this time our interest rate payment from the government became less and less and less. And so during this time, we more or less had automatically, no problem with our government debt within this period. So the reason we can say is not because we made very good economic policy during this time. This was more or less an automatic situation. And then you see here again the rise, and this is Corona especially, and then comes Ukraine with our energy price break and things like this. And this meant that again the government debt started to increase. And if we translate this then in the relative numbers with respect to GDP, then we have here the decrease of the government debt ratio, because here we are more or less constant or even decreased the absolute value. This was a very special period in for an industrial country. I don't know if you have also some country, maybe somebody who has Switzerland. There could be a similar situation, but I don't know. You will find this, and even Switzerland had even more negative interest rates during this time. So it would be interesting if you have a look at the government debt situation. And then in a minute, we have also a very special situation that even during these Corona times and then with the war in the Ukraine, we have here relative to GDP only a very small rise in government debt ratio. Well, and the reason for this, and especially in the actual situation, although we are increasing government debt drastically, the government debt ratio is falling. And the reason for this is that we are calculate the government debt ratio relative to the nominal GDP. So here nominal. Well, a nominal GDP means prices times quantity. And you know that our prices are has exploded the last 2 years, and this means that the denominator increases more than our absolute value in government debt is increasing. Well, and then of course we have made these tricks in Germany that we put our spending for military and for climate change in some other books, and therefore it is not found in the absolute value of government debt. But of course, you have to repay it in 5, 10 years. So, a question? Mm. Okay, so, okay, yeah, I don't know if I can answer this question. Well, the Maastricht criteria for the countries within the European Monetary Union means that deficit should be less than 3% and debt ratio should be less than 60%. And then, of course, you have, since deficit and debt ratio are both relative numbers, then you have to know what are you calculating within the absolute value of government debt. And there is a special definition for the Maastricht debt, absolute value of debt, that you, yeah, so to speak, only want to calculate the long-term or medium or long-term debt. So some numbers which have a cyclical component of short term, you want to take out. So maybe you can find it, but do not do too much research if you look at for numbers for Switzerland. Then they, if you said that they that this number almost doubled for Switzerland, then they, I suppose, have a very different definition of government debt in the national way compared to what we are calculating in the European Monetary Union. But especially you don't have to care that much about it because your focus should be on the on Switzerland itself and not that much relative to to European Monetary Union. But this is then interesting, and this is also a good point that you see. Well, not only taking the first shot, well, typing in Google government debt of Switzerland, because also for Germany and other countries, you will always find different numbers. And this is also your task then to read a little bit more and to find out which one could be a reliable. Well, there is no right number, but what is a reliable number for you? This you should learn via in this analysis. Yeah, okay. What I wanted to do with you today, or I wanted to start, and now because of these technical problems, we ran out of time, is that I wanted to start these little econometric analysis of Okun's law, and maybe starting with some minutes with this is that we want to analyze a dependence between economic growth and unemployment. And well, in general, we would say a rise in unemployment will not be good for economic growth. Qualitatively, I think this is quite clear. But then we want to make a long-term analysis. And then if you think of the business cycle, then we somehow have to deal what is this long-term trend. And for this, we then start with the so-called output gap, that we take the actual output, our GDP, calculating this with respect to the potential output. And then we can say, well, if this actual output is larger than our potential output, and then we also want to compare these numbers internationally, we take the relative number by dividing this also by the potential output, then we more or less can say if this number is positive, then it is this delta here, and therefore we could then say we are in a boom, we are in an expansionary phase of our country, while we can say then if this number is negative, we will be somewhere around here. And then in the following, we will look also at unemployment, and then especially to the change of unemployment within a cycle where also the output gap is sometimes positive and negative. But this we hopefully will do then on Thursday. Okay, then thank you very much for today, and I hope I can solve the technical problems in this room. Thank you very much for today.